to join us, so thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. We are still adding participants. our Humanity First Forum. The desire here is to take an opportunity to hear and listen to each other's voices, to get a sense of the heartbeat of our community here, which involves our students, our staff, our faculty members, our alumni, friends of the institution, and then others that may be connected as well. One of the things that I'm expecting that will occur today is we are going to engage in some very sensitive and somewhat difficult dialogue. I think that we need to begin having some difficult conversations. The ideal here is, though, to create a safe space where we can have confidence that we can share what's on our heart. We can grapple with some of the issues that we're dealing with right now in our society. Maybe we can find some themes and some buckets that we can categorize, and then we can figure out how we're going to move forward, not only as an institution, but as people, as family, as friends, as community members, as colleagues, and in some cases, even as strangers. We are going to have to solve this problem that we have. And we have different ideals about what the problem is, but I think we can all agree that at this particular point and juncture in our history, the fabric of our nation is being ripped apart. And the answers that we're searching for are right in front of us. We're going to find the answers, I believe. So there are some guidelines for engagement that I need to lay out first. Number one, it's important to respect the space that we're in. There may be different opinions and views, but we are going to enter this engagement with right-mindedness, right thinking, and right intentions. If you have a question, for those of us that are engaging via Zoom, you'll have an opportunity to share your questions. I'll give you about 20 seconds per question. If you have a remark, you may have 60 seconds if the remark is tied to the question or you're contributing to an answer. There's support that I'm working with, which is helping to make this interaction hopefully smooth and worthwhile for all of us. Please keep in mind, we have a broad community engaging today. It's made up of two different audiences. One is participating through the Zoom platform. They will be able to raise their hand virtually, and that hand raising indicator is towards the middle of the bottom of your screen. Please note that, and that will notify us that you have a question or you have a comment. We have another audience, a second audience as part of our community. They're being live streamed via YouTube. They'll be able to submit their questions through emporia.edu/live. Our Zoom audience can also submit questions through that same form. Now let's step back and think about how we arrived at this place. There's quite a bit that has happened in our moment today. We have social unrest, civil unrest. We have tension that is fueled by poor race relations. We're dealing with issues of poor accountability and abuse. We're dealing with racism, to say it simple and plain. Many of us have different ideas about what that means, if it's real or not, and so on. But I think it's important for me to set the context for how I'm coming to this conversation. I am the Chief Diversity Officer for Emporia State University, but I cannot, in that role, divorce myself from being a Black man in America. That's part of what has gotten me to this experience that I'm having here today. And I think that's something that we should all recognize is how are we showing up? What context are we showing up in? What experiences do we have as reference points? And what types of information informs our thinking? And we have to learn how to grapple with that and how to move through that. I'm also here because I have faith. I have strong faith that causes me to move forward every day to have these difficult conversations. Now, what is the context of our nation from my point of view? How am I showing up in terms of that framework? Well, just to be quick and to the point, my experience has been extremely challenging throughout my journey. Often in our communities, we are trying to bridge gaps and trying to connect with other people, but we're denying our own identity in the process of doing that in order to fit in or in order to advance. In my case, I would say that has been part of the journey for me as well. I have tension around wanting to be accepted, wanting to be connected, and wanting to be successful, and the realities of prejudice and discrimination and difficulty that permeate throughout my own personal life, my own personal journey, and the journeys of many people that I walk side by side with. So there's a tension there. Specifically, I want to create a safe space. So in order for me to do that, it's very important that I'm transparent as well. And we have to get to the root of the matter. We have to get to the foundation of the issues that our country is dealing with right now. And in order for us to do that, we have to get to the foundation of what it is that we're dealing with in terms of the way that we think and the way that we've experienced this world. Now, for me, I have personal experiences with dealing with racism and dealing with police brutality specifically. And at the same time, I have close friends that are police officers. So it's not a situation that you can categorize and place people in, but there are systems in place that support ways of thinking that gives individuals permission to operate in manners that oppress other people. And when those things occur, they impact relationships, they impact systems, and they impact the way we engage in our daily lives. To be specific, I think it's very important that I'm specific here. In my case, the context that I show up in is the context of having lost a parent to police brutality, my biological father, okay? So I struggle with that, and at the same time, I want to be part of the solution. So there's a great degree of tension when we think about the life that we live and the journey that we're walking. Now, I'd like to take a moment here and shift gears. We have a variety of questions that have come in in advance or comments that have come in advance. And the questions help us to see how other people are showing up to this experience and some of the things that are on their mind. For example, we have a question here that says, we all need to acknowledge systemic patterns of prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism resulting in unfair treatment in our sphere of influence. I reject the premise that systemic racism and prejudice exist in our country. I agree that there are racist individuals of all skin color, but unless you can show specific data, I do not believe systemic racism exists. It just might be that more Blacks are committing violent crimes on a per capita basis, not to mention that a significant number of those cops who are killing Blacks are Black themselves. There are rogue cops just like there are rogue doctors, rogue college presidents, rogue teachers. Here are some things I will acknowledge. I will acknowledge that decades of liberal left-wing policies have destroyed the Black family unit and created and expanded a poverty-stricken government-dependent class among the African-American population. And if allowed, this same elite class will continue to suppress and oppress the African-American population in order to maintain control of that voting bloc. I acknowledge that the Trump administration has done more to elevate the economic status of all minorities than any other administration since Abraham Lincoln. The unemployment rate among minorities was the lowest in history until the virus crisis was initiated. Continue the narrative that systemic racism exists in this nation, a nation that has done more than any other country to right racial wrongs and to advance the freedom and prosperity of all people, not just in our country, but worldwide, does nothing but create strife. Perpetuating the notion that the US is racist only causes division and destabilizes society, which we're seeing happen now. And if Black Lives Matter, why are you not protesting all the Black lives that are snuffed out on a daily basis by other Blacks? Why is no one protesting the murder of the retired Black officer at the hands of rioters in St. Louis? Why does that Black officer not inspire this conversation about humanity? I resent the suggestion that I should acknowledge systemic racism and prejudice, or that I should engage in conversation to discuss conscious or unconscious discrimination. My great-great-grandfather suffered a traumatic head wound fighting to free the slaves in the Civil War. The United States of America is not a racist nation. I will not submit to the narrative that it is. So this is where we are. This comment was submitted from an individual who cares about our country, who cares about the condition of our country, who is willing to engage, but does not believe that systemic racism exists and does not believe that the problems that we're experiencing are the same as maybe others believe. However, this particular voice represents a large population of people. It's not just a one-off comment. And the point here is that we are going to have to come together and have these tough conversations that we're hopefully starting today. Now, without me going into my own response to that, what I will say is that it's very important to learn about Black history in America. It's very important to learn about the histories of people of color in this country. It's very important to learn about the histories of women in this country. It's very important to learn about the histories of different types of people across this nation in order to understand how the systems that were created that weren't designed initially to include those populations have had to be amended instead of transformed. Okay, so I'm encouraging everyone to do your homework in order to participate and unpack some of these challenges that we're having. I also see another comment that just showed up. The national attention span is short. Usually there is intensive collective emotion expressed immediately after an event like the murder of George Floyd, but shortly thereafter the attention wanes and the problem is soon forgotten. How do we keep the momentum going and make progress on race in America when we as a country are so easily distracted? That's a very important point. So when we think about systemic issues, it's not as simple as how am I doing today? It's more about how am I able to operate equally with my my community members, my colleagues, others in society in order to advance the community as a whole. And that question can be answered until we actually take a look at the root of the matter, or the foundation that everything is built on. The nation that we live in, I believe we can all admit, was built on traditions of racism and traditions of dehumanizing our Native American populations and of course our African American populations, and it also dehumanized women across the board. I think history supports that. The challenge though is understanding how history has played itself out in policies and practices and legislation and opportunity across time, whether it's access to housing or access to educational opportunity or economic opportunity, access to freedom to move from one place to another without feeling hurt, harm, or danger, access to think freely and operate freely as long as you're not harming someone else, and access to being able to enjoy your own culture and your own beliefs within the land of the free and the home of the brave. So the American promise is dynamic and it's extremely attractive to everyone across the globe. And I'm definitely in support of that promise as well. I think we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, how did we get here? You know, how did I get here individually? How did our nation get here collectively? Examine the root, the foundation, in order to move forward properly. There is another comment here that came in early. Excuse me, I have a little difficulty here. It says, how can we help each other to know that all lives matter? It seems to me that society is quick to point out that Black lives matter, and they do. All lives matter. So many times people of color, including white, and race and gender and religion and socioeconomic status are treated unfairly, even to the point of being murdered. The discriminatory acts are a result of human action and choice. How can we work together to help people know that destroying property and people does not equal justice? How can we help people to know that two wrongs do not make a right? This is another question that and comment that is very, very valid. It's a very common point of view, I think, from many people who have a desire to see peace and to see justice. And in order to do that, once again, I'm encouraging us to take a close look at why are people having to make the statement that Black Lives Matter if they already do? If Black lives already matter, why is the statement being pronounced? And I think Black Lives Matter, that statement really is not so much about Black Lives Matter. It's more about the dehumanization of groups of people, specifically in this case, dark-skinned people around the world. And here, in particular, in the United States. And when we dehumanize one group of people, we're actually dehumanizing everyone. And so, in fact, all lives do matter. And it's very important not to dehumanize others. It's important to humanize others. But in order to humanize others, you have to actually look at the unconscious psychological influence that causes us to think the way that we do and make the decisions that we make, and realize that no group of people are superior or inferior to another group. And when you recognize that, it's important to identify practices and policies and philosophies that support one group being superior over another, and dismantle those constructs. And that's a very important point to consider. We have a new question here. What would it look like if we as a Hornet Nation could establish a culture where it is okay to ask questions without fear of saying the wrong thing or saying something that might offend? I believe fear of making a mistake keeps us from communicating deeply and making forward progress. Can we fix that, and how? We have to. I'm excited to get that question because what that says is the question indicates that there's hope, but we have to be willing to take risk. And it is going to be messy, but we have to be willing to get messy in it together and come out on the other side, clean and with right minds and right thinking and right actions and right attitudes. So yes, I think we have to be willing to not intellectualize the work of humanity. That's what this is. We have to not intellectualize the work of humanity. And another comment here says, the concise comment from Victoria Partridge helped me understand all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. That's profound. If you're willing to leave the one and move forward with the 99, then how can you say you love them all? That's a very important question that I think we should all be asking ourselves. I want to open it up to our Zoom audience and see if there's any comments or questions that you have. I think I've done my best to provide a starting point. This conversation is for you. It's just for me to facilitate. So if you have any thoughts, raise your hand and you will be acknowledged, and we'll pull you in. I know that we have some alum that have signed on. Participants, raise your hand. There's a real concern about safety. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. While all lives do matter, the data I've seen suggests that Black lives are at a considerable more risk on a variety of levels than white lives. Question: problem seems overwhelming. What can individuals do to change systems? What specific things can white people do to help make a more equal society? It's easy for me to simply post a comment or meme on social media and delude myself into thinking that I've done something meaningful. What are your thoughts or the thoughts of others? I want to open that up for others to comment on. My immediate thought is, number one, you have to start with the people who are closest to you. That would be your family. That would be your mate, your spouse, your children, your parents. We all don't come to this conversation with the same ideals. And allow yourself to be challenged and challenge others in their thinking. Also, it's more important to reach outside your comfort zone and get a sense of what others' experiences might be that are not common to you. I don't expect for anyone to know exactly what it's like to be, Black in America, just like I will never know what it's like to be a woman. But I respect women, and I know that there's a much greater degree of challenge in a male-dominant world than I could experience. And I would also say that I would encourage you to realize that living in a Eurocentric nation has its systematic mechanisms in place that add value to those elements that enhance that culture and those ideals in that particular group of people, and it devalues, in many cases, or commercializes multiple other cultures and ideals. So we have to be willing to unpack these experiences in order to get to some of the systemic challenges that we have. First, I think we have to accept the fact that there are systemic challenges. So research that, look into that, and uncover that. Here's a comment. I was raised in the Deep South post-Emmett Till. I went to segregated schools. We hid from the Klan when I was a child. We have entered the downward spiral. My wife is of Eastern European descent. My oldest daughter is married to a man descended from British ancestry, and our grandchild is a mixture of these worlds. I am stranded amidst many worlds. This is the reality that I think many of us are living in. We're not one pure ethnic group or another in most cases. And if we are, we're not living in an exclusive community that only has that particular group of people. We're definitely not in a nation that is mono ethnic. And so we have to learn how to be sensitive to the experiences that others are having if we want to repair the issues of our nation. Okay, we have our first hand up, so let's engage. Go ahead. I think it's Lindsay.
Yes. So in reference to the very first comment that you started with, so often when we are trying to talk about issues that are happening currently, many of the people who are talking about it are coming to it with very different perspectives on the whole historical perspective. And so often we really need to start way back with setting our understanding of what the lay of the land is.
That's right.
But that's so complicated and that takes so much time. Do you have thoughts on how, particularly when it's having that discussion with someone that we're not, isn't in our life where we're able to sit and talk for several hours over an issue? How do we as communities have those conversations when they are going to be intensive and need to go through a lot of layers?
That's a great question, Lindsay. we have to be willing to give it the time and attention that is required for the outcome that we want. And if we're not willing to do that, then we can't expect anything new or anything better. It's simple as that. And it has taken us, as long as it's taken us to build this nation, it's going to take us at least a willingness to engage with that degree of commitment and perseverance in order to see the land of the free and the home of the brave become a true promise for all Americans. And what's required is for us to start now. You know, start with yourself. Start with doing your own research and your own reading. Start with identifying your own accountability partners. And this isn't about whether you're Republican or you're a Democrat or you're independent, or it has nothing to do with that. This is about actually making a clear decision about what kind of community you want to live in, and what kind of nation you want to live in, and what kind of future you want to have for your children and your children's children and their children's children. That's exactly what this is about. This is much bigger than just me as an individual or you as an individual. And so there's a legacy of change that's going to need to be committed to in order for the legacy of and tradition of racism to be transformed into equity. Okay, and you can't really say it any more plain than that. And if there are individuals, which in fact there are many individuals that refuse to believe that, you know, systemic racism exists, I think what's important is to understand the progress of our nation. You know, we came out of a situation where, you know, Europeans fled the British, and they came to a new land, and they built, you know, a nation, and then here we are. No, that's not the story, okay? That's part of the story. The story is that there were individuals that came here to establish a colony, okay, for British. And in that process of establishing the colonies, they wanted freedom. They themselves wanted freedom because they themselves were being oppressed, okay? And in the process of pursuing freedom, they oppressed another group of people, which were the native people here. The natives did not make cooperative slaves because they were very familiar with the lay of the land. They had their own language, and they were not, it just wasn't going to work. So that's when the slave industry began, bringing Africans here to our country, removing the culture, the language, the religion, the beliefs, stripping from family, okay? And deconstructing the human population of Africans, okay? It's in our laws. When we look at our Constitution, originally, Black people were considered partial human, 3/5. That's the foundation that we have built everything else onto, and we need to reconcile ourselves with that. And in order for our generations going forward to be able to have the promise of this American dream. So, and then there's a series of things that happened: the Jim Crow laws, the Civil Rights Movement, the amendments and legislation to bring equity into law. But we could not legislate matters of the heart. We could not take the marginalized populations and the oppressed populations of Black people and tell white America that, you know, you have to love Black people as equal. You can't do that. That's a personal choice, okay? And when we struggle with that dynamic, it shows itself up in dehumanizing and manners that are integrated throughout our systems, our policies, our programs, our practices. And we've been trying to untangle that for 400 years, you know? And so this is evidence another data point, another indicator that we have a lot of work to do. So let's go to our next question. I think there was a hand raised by Mike Mercer. Oh, I think he may have accidentally chimed in. So I want to call on a few people, if that's okay. Is there anyone who has their own thoughts and reflections about where we are and how to go forward? This isn't an opportunity for me to hold court or for me to tell you all of my thinking. It's more of an opportunity to get your thoughts out. Okay, I see a hand raised. We have Tyler Curtis.
Can you hear me okay now?
We can hear you, sir.
All right. So, hey, I just appreciate your conversation. I really appreciate your comments and the way you teed this thing up. Just allow for a lot of dialogue. I think the only thing I was wanting maybe to possibly offer is I saw an interesting, I guess, way of viewing the current response to George Floyd's death, which has been somewhat criticized, the riots and those kind of things. But I saw it viewed in a different way, and it comes from Pastor Adam Hamilton up in Kansas City at the Methodist Church there, and he mentions it like this. He says, the current riots and situations that are happening are like a fever.
That's right.
They're indicative of a deeper virus. They're indicative of a problem. And sure, I mean, while those things aren't necessarily helping the current situation, it's an indicator that there's a situation that needs to be helped. So I'm intrigued and just, I think, looking forward to taking those next steps. And Dr. Allen, I know you've got a lot of plans in place with the University Diversity and Inclusion Alliance and other partnerships throughout campus and the community. But I look forward to us all being part of the solution going forward, making progress. It's not going to be about fixing the problem. It's going to be about making progress towards a better situation to be in. And I look forward to being just a part of that journey with you and others.
Thank you, Tyler. And thanks for bringing that analogy to the forefront. Anytime, the nation is like a body, and that's a great analogy. Our nation is like a body of people. But it's one body. We may believe that we're independent and separate from others, but our nation will not succeed until we recognize that, the foot bone is connected to the leg bone, and the leg bone is connected to the hip bone, and all that, because it's very real. And so if part of our body is not doing well, then it's going to cause pain unattended for the rest of our body. And that means everybody, okay? And so one of the questions that just came in is, what are some suggested strategies we can take to help educate, inform, and share with others that may not initially be open to listening, learning, and gaining new perspectives? Individuals in this call are all wanting to learn and get together. How do we spread and share what is discussed today to those that do not log into discussions like this? I think it goes along with one of the things that Tyler was just bringing forth in this analogy. We're all one body. We have a fever right now, and it's important that we tend to it. Please don't believe that because you are a fingernail, you might think that you're insignificant, or because you're the brain, that you might think that you run everything. Because we have learned that brains don't make everything work. properly. It takes all parts of the body to make it go. So what I recommend is that start the conversation with small groups. You can start with the people that you work with, and if the starting the conversation doesn't mean that you have to have the answers, that you have to push solutions. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with what other people are saying. What it means is that you're creating a safe space for the dialogue to occur. And you have to intentionally create that safe space, no matter what the point of view is, so the conversation can continue and you have an opportunity to unpack the issues with that person or with that group. And as you move along and you begin to find some mutual points of understanding, for example, I value life. I think everyone on this call values life. And I think that's where the concept all lives matter comes forth. And all lives do matter. So if that's the starting point, then start there. Don't reject all lives matter. Let that be your starting point, because it's true. All lives do matter. The challenge is all lives aren't seen the same. And so it doesn't always translate into action. But you got to get to a place where you can have that conversation, and you can't get there unless you're willing to start where people are at. And that includes you as well. People, you may not be as far along as others, and you can ask individuals to explain to you what it is that they're concerned about, what it is that their points of view are, and try to learn from them as well. So small introspective work, small groups, larger groups, and then looking at action steps that you can take within your personal sphere to hold yourselves accountable in moving that change forward. Another question here is, what about providing some examples of systemic racism, since there are non-believers? Okay. Systemic racism is I'll give you some historical examples, and then we'll look at some contemporary examples. Historically, the white water fountain and the black water fountain, that's called systemic racism right there. The system that's put in place says a black person can't drink out of a white water fountain. Now, if it were just the sign alone, that would be enough to be an issue. But beyond the sign, there were policies in place and legislation put in place to support that ideal. And when those ideals are supported by the law and you're operating within the law, then the law becomes the system that supports racist behavior. Okay? That's a very simple example. Now, let's think about how that plays out in the psyche of the nation that we live in. In the psyche of the nation, we see the sign that says white water fountain, colored water fountain. Now, we know that that's not right. But even if a white person wanted to drink out of the colored water fountain, they're looked down upon, okay? They're shunned, okay? There's a need to change that system in order to support equity. When we are not willing to accept that need to change the system, then it starts to become part of the way that we subconsciously think. And that way of thinking, that philosophy carries into how we do business and how we administer law and how we interact with people for generations. So when we have some that don't believe and we have some that do believe, when we know the evidence is there in the root of the matter, we cannot make correction going forward if we're not willing to address the root. And we haven't been willing to address the root. These types of policies have played out in terms of redlining when searching for real estate or wanting to buy a home. There's clear evidence, and research will support that. It plays out in terms of access to voting and voting rights. And I think we can dig deeper into that at some other time, but I encourage you to do your research there. It plays out in terms of economic opportunity. And it plays out in terms of our criminal justice system and our prison system as well. It's not to say that a white person creates a crime or is involved in a crime and a black person is involved in a crime and they're both not criminals, because they both are in fact criminals. But it's to say that the way the law is administered and the imbalance of the administration of that law plays itself out in whether you get appropriate legal counsel, or whether you can afford legal counsel, or you have to get a public defender. The degree of punishment that's administered tends to be out of balance. Therefore, in a criminal justice system, we have many more people of color, and in particular, African Americans, compared to the population that exists in our country. So now we're talking about the system there. And those are things that I think that if we were willing to step out of our advantaged position that we might be in and look at the matter from a neutral point of view, we will start to see it and we will start to unpack that. And the way that impacts populations is you don't have a father in the home. You know, the mother is burdened with raising a child or two or three, economic challenges, health challenges, housing challenges, education challenges, and the beat goes on, okay? It's very simple if we were willing to pay attention. We've got Asher Delmont with his hand raised. Go ahead, Asher, if you're with us.
Hi, I have a comment, I guess, and maybe a question for you. Okay. A couple of people have said, they've asked the question, you know, well, what can we say to people to get them to understand? And based on some conversations that I've been in a part of with you previously, I wonder if part of the answer to that is, instead of what can I say to them, it's what can I hear from them? And start actually with listening to what they have to say. And the analogy that I'd use there is, you know, if we approach somebody and we say, you know, hey, can you tell me how a car works? They'll say, yeah, you turn the key and then you put it in gear and you drive it. Right. But that's not really how a car works. I mean, if you talk about internal combustion and the motor and all that, there's a lot more to it. And so a lot of people come in saying, yes, I know how this works. And yet there's a lot that they don't know. And if they expose that gap in their own knowledge, that's what opens the conversation.
That's right.
Would you agree with that?
I would agree. Thank you, Asher. Great comment. Great comment. It's interesting because we have to be patient with each other in meeting each other at that point. So, for example, and we also have to have a discerning spirit. Okay, we have to have a spirit of discernment, patience, wisdom, care, love. In the middle of madness, we have to operate that way. So when somebody comes to us and they ask a question, we can't simply say, yes, the key, yes, that is the way it works. You turn the key and the car comes on and then you drive it. That's not exactly it. But you meet them there. And maybe you ask them, what else do they know about mechanics, or what else do they know about the car? They may know something about the accelerator, the brakes. They may know something about the steering, the radio. They may know something about how the seats move. Now you're starting to get into how the machine really works, not just that it does work. And when you start to learn with people in collaboration with them, then you can see those opportunity gaps and you get an opportunity. And when those opportunity gaps present themselves, you have an opportunity in that moment to bridge that gap with them in real time, in conversation, in learning, in exchanging, and becoming more in solidarity. It's not a matter of convincing someone of something or debating. It's a matter of just trying to meet people where they are, and you allowing yourself to be humble enough to know that you don't know all the answers, just like I don't know all the answers, and exchange and be willing to walk that journey, together. I do that with police officers. I have had a good conversation with the chief of police here on campus and in the city, both chief of police. I've worked with the chief of police in Denver and Aurora. And once again, it's been a stretch for me. But I've learned that we have to meet each other where we're at in order to walk this journey together. So thanks, Asher. Another question that came up is, you spoke about the importance of educating ourselves in order to more honestly evaluate the systems in which we participate. Are there any specific resources, books, podcasts, social media pages you suggest for engaging in that process? Great question. What I'm going to ask everybody to do, that's a great reminder, is to submit any resources that you have or that you're aware of. So we can just get a master resource list available. And what I'm committing to do is making that resource list available to everybody that's part of this conversation. I will say that there are a few books. So this is interesting. In terms of some of the historical elements of our nation, there's a project called the 1619 Project, and it speaks about the legacy of slavery. It's a relatively new project that is underway maybe within the last year or so, but it helps us to understand some of the false beliefs that we've had about, particularly about African Americans, and how we can deconstruct that. There's another book that I think is maybe more relevant to Kansas. It's called Light is Bursting Upon the World. It speaks about white supremacy and racist violence against Blacks in Reconstruction Kansas by Brent Capney. That particular book I haven't read, but it seems like it's an interesting read. And it's probably from a very, I think it's an article, maybe not a book, but it speaks about something that may be relevant to our Kansas culture here. The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration and the New Jim Crow, is another book by Michelle Alexander. Locking Up Our Own, James Foreman, and Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman. I've got a few other resources here that are coming up. Thank you, Dr. Gerke. Whistling, Vivaldi, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Growing Up White, The Hate You Give, Things Well Intended, People Say. There's a lot of resources out there. And so, let's collect those resources, and we'll post them here at ESU. We have a fantastic dean, Michelle Hammond, who I'm sure is willing to help anyone who's interested in finding materials. And let's be sure to keep the conversation going and transition to action at some point. Hillary Lupfer has her hand up. So let's see what Hillary wants to share.
I more had a question. I know a lot of us, especially people like myself who are white Americans, want to say, I'm an ally to Black people and people of color. I go to protests or I donate to these certain organizations. But I heard a comment this week that made me kind of think more about that, where a Black woman said, you do not get to decide if you are an ally. We get to decide. And I just wanted to know if you agreed with that statement.
That's a good question, and a good a good statement, interesting statement that she made. The interesting part of this is it's like a mentor, if you will. Sometimes we identify people as mentors and they don't even know that they're mentors. We watch them, we look at the qualities and actions that they embrace. And they've been a mentor to us for maybe 10 or 15 years and never even knew it. And so there's not a need necessarily to establish that. And then there's those more formal relationships where we say, I want you to be my mentor, or a mentor comes and says, I want to be your mentor. Well, it's hard for somebody to say they want to be your mentor if the mentee isn't willing to engage in that relationship. So in this case, I think it's both and. I think that you can be an ally without someone giving you the permission to be an ally. But I also think that you cannot claim to be an ally of any particular group or person without being embraced by that individual, or group. So it's really an awkward answer that I'm giving. But just do the good work and let the work speak for itself. Don't worry about the rest. That's my answer. Abby Smith has her hand up. And just to note, we have 7 minutes left.
Hey, I have a few things to say, but I'm a Emporia State alumni and old student athlete, so I've always been proud to be a Hornet, but I can't say that I've ever been more proud than I am now that this conversation is happening. And I think this is what, I don't know what other universities are doing, but I hope it's something like this. And if not, that's what they need to be doing. The other thing that I'd like to say is over the past 2 weeks almost, I've come to realize as a white woman that it's time for me to kind of just sit down and listen to what Black people have to say and to let them use their voice and not only just listen, but actually hear what they're saying. And I'm committed to educating myself a lot more about what's going on and the history, Black history, which is actually just American history.
That's
what
right.
I've come to find out, that's all it is. I mean, that's where it all started. So really kind of unlearning and relearning is my goal throughout all of this, to just stand with everyone. And I hope that people can open their minds and do the same.
Thank you for your encouraging remarks. Tyler Curtis, he always says, and as well as Shelley Gerke, is proud. It's a great day to be a Hornet. I'm proud to be a Hornet. And I think, Abby, you have really captured that spirit in your remarks. The reality here is that we're just beginning, okay? Emporia State is not a perfect institution. Emporia State is made up of imperfect people that are really trying to do great work. And sometimes we make mistakes, but the commitment here is to get up and dust ourselves off, look at each other, figure out what it is that we maybe could have improved on, and do it better the next time. That's what this is all about. It's not about me saying, you're wrong and I'm right and I hate you and all. That's not what this is about. This is about saying, you know what? Humanity matters. Okay? Humanity matters. Humanity matters for all people. And the issue at hand is, Why are we missing that with our Black people? Why are we missing understanding that for our Black community? Why are we missing embracing that? It's not to say that all people don't matter, but we're missing something here. And society is judged on how it treats its most marginalized populations. Okay, so it doesn't matter about how advanced we are, how much technology we have, how much money we make. If our economy is thriving, how are we treating the most marginalized populations? That's how we're going to be judged. And right now, the dream of America is being challenged because we're not treating the most marginalized very well at all. Okay, so with that said, I've got 3 minutes left. A few final books to consider are Killing Rage by Bell Hooks. And I think I might have already said Things Well Intended, People Say. Well, we're at the end here. I want to give a shout out to our alum that have joined us. They are the connection, but they're the lifeline between this institution and our community. I want to give a shout out to our students because they are the lifeblood of who we are. I'd like to give a shout out to our staff because they are the ones that are not only the front line, but they're behind the lines, keeping everything moving for this institution. I want to give a shout out for our faculty because they're the ones that deliver the opportunities through curriculum for everyone involved. And obviously, there are friends of the institution that help make us humane and relevant. Thank you all. Any questions that come in afterwards, I'm willing to respond individually, and we will keep you informed about any upcoming opportunities to have town hall talks in the future. So thank you. I think we'll close.